We are a nonprofit, so we're funded primarily by corporate sponsorships. So we want to give a big shout out to Nivagen and SMUD, who are gold level sponsors of StartupSac. So thank you to them, even though I don't think we have anybody from their organizations here. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. And so I think that's a perfect time to segue over to the actual interview and the main meat of this program. So Cameron Law tonight is going to interview our guest entrepreneur tonight, who is Jontae James, who is the founder of NatureTrak. So Cameron and Jontae, I'm going to kick it over. It's up to you guys to introduce yourselves and tell us all about your entrepreneurial journey, Jontae.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. And so just a quick housekeeping and more recommendation for user experiences. If you want to hop into speaker view, it's probably the best way to engage in the session. If you don't know how to do that, it's in the top right, clicking view, and then put it in speaker view, and then you can see the conversation that way. But jumping in, I want to introduce Jontae James. I had the pleasure of connecting with him yesterday and obviously reading some of his recent articles that have been published in the Business Journal, but really excited to hear his story and have him share his entrepreneurial journey with all of you and really have that knowledge be shared within our ecosystem. But Jontae James is the founder of NatureTrak, an enterprise risk management platform for financial institutions that bank the cannabis industry. He has consulted with government agencies to build track and trace solutions, creating proprietary algorithms to uncover unusual or suspicious activity in the supply chain. Jontae has over 15 years in government and enterprise SaaS supply chain management experience. Prior to NatureTrak, he co-founded Bluntly, a digital licensing platform in the cannabis industry, which specialized in patient and entity license verification. This was the first of several track and trace technologies to bring transparency and visibility into the emerging cannabis market. Jontae has led a boutique venture capital organizations, sales and marketing for early stage startups. He is also passionate about entrepreneurship and launched a consumer-driven mobile app created to promote a more active, connected, and productive employees called You're Out of Office. So along with a community building solution aimed towards entertainment and industry, media agencies to develop business partners to align resources with social media platforms such as celebrity campaigns, political media campaigns, and news releases. He also holds a BA from the University of St. Francis in business management. And so as you can see, he's had a plethora of entrepreneurial experiences, and we're really excited to have him here today. So just in kicking us off, Jontae, I would love if you could just share with us a little bit about yourself and your entrepreneurial journeys, and if you could, share a little bit about what NatureTrak does. Obviously, I shared the high-level value proposition, but would love to learn more about the nitty-gritty of NatureTrak.
No, absolutely. First off, thank you for having me here. It's an honor, and I'm humbled to be able to be part of StartupSac and the Carlsen Center and be able to share my story. As an entrepreneur, there's so many ups and downs, and it's always good to get that little pat on the back that, hey, you made it somewhere. So I definitely super appreciate it for that. But Cameron, listening to you rattle off the bio, I'm like, oh man, I have done a lot. So I mean, I really got the startup bug when I came back to California. I was in Indiana throughout high school and college. And when I came back to California and I was working with a branding company, we were working through we had clients in the pharmaceutical space. And I was providing, promotional material for, pins, hats for certain drugs and stuff within the pharma space. And that was kind of like my first brush with business when I had this huge account that I closed. My commission was going to be like $100,000, and I was spending the money before I even got it. And by the time it got to me, the taxes and everything else and the split I had, I received $40,000, and I'm like, all right, that's not going to work. So I was like, I need to start my own business. And being in Silicon Valley with a lot of the tech stuff that's going on, I was really looking like, how do we get plugged into the communities? Coming from Indiana back into the Bay Area scene, you were trying to find a community that you identified with, as well as, you could promote and network within. And so that's where my first venue started, was with, the After Five Network, where we were working with Fortune 500 companies, and some companies like Plantronics and VMware, just to name a few, that when recruits would come from out of town, how to plug them not only into the culture of the company, but the culture around the community that they're in, and like-minded stuff. And so as I kind of transitioned through there, I started to learn, technology and coding with my CTO at the time. So I began, PMing on project management during that time, a whole nother skill set that I didn't have. And then I kind of transferred over to more the VC side, where one of my mentors, Ephraim Lindenbaum, he had kind of brought me on to the scene to help with biz dev and sales and marketing for early stage startups. So I started to get parachuted in to a lot of different startups, similar to NatureTrak, and where they're at in the stages, and start filling the gaps. And so I always filled a certain role at that time. And so that allowed me to kind of round out my skill set, that I've been in, government solutions, I've been in enterprise solutions, I was also in agricultural solutions as well. And so I had a good mix from there, and being able to kind of utilize my skills just within that pattern. And then the opportunity came for NatureTrak. I mean, cannabis was on the rise. When we started looking into cannabis, it was around 2016 that I was really poking my head in and seeing what's going on. And one of my really great friends and business partners now, Ron Brandon, he came to me with the idea of franchising his grow business. And so at that time, I knew enough about cannabis, but I didn't know the mechanics of everything. So I'm like, all right, let's see what we can do. And what happened during those conversations, and trying to figure out, how we raise money for this venture for him, he was teaching me all the loopholes in the law. And at that time, it was Prop 215, which was medical cannabis here in California. And is looking at those gaps, I was like, there's a platform play in here. There's technology that needs to solve this if this is going to become legal at that time. And so that's when I took my background and set out on this kind of journey to where NatureTrak is. We started with Bluntly. We did a small POC on that side, just in the verification and the transparency that people needed. At that time, it was, again, a nonprofit. So there was no NAICS code to say, hey, you're a cannabis business or you're a nonprofit organization that was serving medical cannabis. So you really only had, your seller's permit, your business license. There's really nothing to really identify with that. So you had people that would pop up that were flower shops, right? Or healthcare or parlors in that situation. So really trying to cut through that clutter and noise to say, hey, I am a dispensary at the time, and I am doing, legal business and serving a need within the community. And that's when we caught the eye with some of the government players in there. And I had came through with a child support company, so I had already had some familiarity with KPMG and Deloitte and Accenture and them. And so I had reached out to KPMG to see if they had interest in the cannabis market, and that they were actually, working towards there. So we had, had a small subcontract and to go after the cannabis activity tracking system, which is now Metric here in California. And so it was at that time that I gained, the functional requirements, the system architecture of what the system should be, or what the platform should be for cannabis here in California, and tracking it basically from seed to sale. And so when, they jumped out, we were sitting here with Bluntly being just a small piece of that puzzle. And that's really when NatureTrak was formed. We became that enterprise level track and trace system for commercial cannabis. And we kind of took that ride through, Prop, the Mercursa, to the regulation of the legalization of cannabis in California, and being a compliance tool, not only for, big enterprise solutions, but for the moms and pops. The cannabis industry is built on the backs of the caretakers of this industry. You know, it's the small farms, you know, it's minority based. The history in Humboldt is obviously great, and everybody knows that here. So it was really, how do we serve this industry when the fear is big ag, big pharma is going to come in and take it over? And it starts with compliance. It was getting compliant, it's getting a license and having a viable business in order to operate. And as the flood of technologies came in when legalization passed, just some of my experience on that VC side was like, well, there needs to be a connectivity play here, an integration play. And so we streamlined our operations. We built an enterprise level API to connect to any seed to sell software out there, which was mandated by the government that they use. We also integrated with POS systems or point of sale, logistics, ERP system. So we're really grabbing the data from that point. And we had, you know, close to over 250 cannabis operators using our system. We had over 150 million transactions that were passing through our platform. And it was at that time where it was time to monetize. And, you know, it's one of these big things that we face as entrepreneurs, that if you don't build the monetization model at the beginning, there comes a point where, well, how do we monetize this? And we've been given this great solution away with track and trace. And it was on the banking side. We had an alliance with a group that wanted to buy a bank. And the idea behind buying that bank is that we had software that could aggregate the data, we can connect to the seed to sell systems, and then that would provide the transparency for the financial institutions. And that's when we had that aha moment. It wasn't track and trace for operators. What we were building was track and trace for banks. And so that ultimately became our risk management platform that we have today. The proprietary technology that we have in there, we call it MAD, and MAD stands for Marijuana Anomaly Detection. And what we learned through those 150 million transactions of cannabis operators using our system are where the fail safes at. You know, what mistakes do they make in the system? What are certain profiles? What happens within the life cycle? And so we built that all into the platform, so that when we talk to our financial institutions today who are interested in banking cannabis, it's not the dollar amount that the bank is worried about, right? We're dealing with BSA, you know, the Bank Secrecy Act, anti-money laundering, AML. And so the whole goal behind that, with it still technically being federally illegal, is providing that audit trail in order to have the cannabis banks, or these banks, bank the cannabis industry. And so we're teaching them that it's not the dollar amount. Like there's small jars as big as baby food almost that could go for $4,000 a distillate. So it's really about the production and understanding the supply chain. And so our platform helps understand the makeup of each operator that the cannabis or that the financial institution is banking, whether they're a cultivator, a manufacturer, a dispensary. We create that profile. We set it amongst their SOPs, or their standard operating procedures that they have to submit to the bank, their financial projections, etc. Now we set that profile and we monitor the activity from the deposits based upon that profile. And then from there, we're able to consume products from their inventory. So it's not just providing an invoice. Anybody can create an invoice. We're actually pulling the data from their inventory management systems, matching it to the deposits, and providing that full audit trail for the banks.
Awesome. There's a lot to chew on there, which is great. So I appreciate you sharing not only your story, but what NatureTrak does, and the story of where you got to NatureTrak. And so some of the things I was pulling just was, you know, as you moved back to the California, was really that you got that startup bug, and that's where all those different ventures and engaging in that space. And I love the community aspect that you talked about, of how that proximity to other entrepreneurs and startups really fostered that. And so hopefully we are doing that here today for those that aren't entrepreneurs yet, getting excited and inspired to take some of those next steps. And then I just love the way you demonstrated that you really look and identify opportunities within existing challenges, right? And seeing those gaps as ways to actually create a solution and solve a real need. One of the things I wanted to jump back to was you mentioned this aha moment of where you were really in the compliance space, and now you saw, well, we have to monetize this in order to be sustainable, and shifting to this where you went to the banking industry as really your customer segment, right? You switched that over. I'm curious of kind of, saying it in an aha moment is like, hey, that's great. What was that transition like for you and your team? I think that's so crucial for so many startups, and that kind of that making that pivot. Obviously, the initial compliance gave you some of the insight to get to that point, but I'm curious of that shift that made for you and your team and the process you went through.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming to that aha moment, all you heard throughout banking or throughout the industry is banks need to be involved. How do you get the cash off the streets? There needs to be electronic payments, right? So there's payment processors and stuff, and everything was just coming out the woodwork. There's people that are providing financial services, but then they were gouging the industry. And in our kind of mission and our thesis within the company is like, we want to legitimize the industry. And there's people definitely praying. There's sharks that, see blood in the water or green in the water at this time. And so they were taking advantage of these operators. And we knew that the mom and pops, or the diverse nations that have been criminalized because the war on drugs were not going to survive unless they had these resources. You can't receive funding if you don't have a bank account. So where's the money going to go? If you're paying your rent or your lease, nobody wants you to drop off $10, $20, $30,000 in cash. Where are we going to do that? And so it's actually, we were trying to figure that out when we're looking at partnering with some of these players that were saying they're offering banking services. And it's a kind of a crazy story. We were in LA, and I was going to be speaking at a conference, and I think it was the state of cannabis or something. And Ron Brand and I, we were driving down the 110 to go set up the booth. And then it was at that moment, we were just like, you know what? We're track and trace for banks. We started at that moment. We're like, we're track and trace for banks. We have the visibility in order for you to get a bank account. We can get you a bank account. And we started down that path. We made those partnerships, even with, some of those sharks, to go to the industry and say, hey, we can help you get a bank account, ultimately trying to get to the FIs. And that's where the monetization was happening. We were offering our track and trace for free. We could make, a VIG or some basis points off of the transactions that were coming into the bait, or fee income for the accounts that they were charging. And that's how we were going to monetize from there. It was like the amount of money is staggering that's moving through. And what we have today, I mean, just to give you guys some stats that we did during the pandemic, last year, 2020, I mean, we enabled over $1.2 billion in cannabis transactions through our platform. 500 million of that was cash deposits. Another 100 million was taxes. And so where we stand now is that our business model is that we share in the revenue of these deposits. So when we talk to the financial institutions, we're talking to them about their spread, right? How a bank makes money is loaning out the money. I was actually listening to Kevin Hart the other day, and they had a funny story about when they first kind of made their own money. They went to the bank and they're like, hey, I want to take out 100 grand. And the bank was like, we don't have it. And so they didn't understand that, the bank's not housing the money. The bank's lending out in small business loans, the home loans, et cetera, right? And so there's a percentage in which the ratio that they're living in. And so where cannabis helps is increasing that spread within the bank, where they try to live in this average of like 4% of the spread. We bring what they call zero cost deposits, or we're bringing ACH transactions that increase that spread from anywhere from 1% to 2% on that side. And because now that becomes a profit center in the bank, we share on that revenue. And we share anywhere from 10 to 100 basis points, depending on how much heavy lifting we're doing with the bank in terms of their compliance or how much they're utilizing of our platform. So it's really a shared success model where everybody wins. And because the banks are utilizing our software, now the cost has come down on compliance for operators to bank with them. So, one of our huge banking partners, at one point in time, they were anywhere from, $3,000 in fees just to have a cannabis banking account. And they brought that down to now 2,000, 1,000, sometimes 500, depending on the risk score that we provide for that. So all that helps for the industry being more legitimate at this time, because when the banks are behind it and the money is in the banks, investments can come, and we're taking that kind of risk of people running around with, duffel bags of cash, which they very much do. That helps for the industry overall, and that's where we're standing at.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, just the statistic of putting, $1.2 billion into the banking system through legitimizing the industry is, a huge statistic in a year for sure. So, and just the breakdown of that. And I love the approach to the win-win-win approach, right? And it's really, I imagine you and your team really dove deep into kind of the value proposition amongst those different stakeholders and users, and an ecosystem that certainly is not easy to navigate with all those different needs, not only from, the customer side to, the banking institution to regulators. And that's kind of where I wanted to jump into the next question. As someone in this space, there are, so many, diverse, business and individuals you're working with. And I'm curious, kind of as a platform, how are you kind of building your team around that and activating them to engage with those different stakeholders?
No, that's a great question. I'm hanging out at the farms, and then I go to the Capitol at the next day, right? I put the suit on one day, I wear my hoodie the next day. And so we're really, the stakeholders in the space are so diverse in who you're interacting with. You really got to tailor it. And then the fact that we're in banking now, if you would have asked me in college if I was going to have an econ background or nothing, I would have been like, no way, not doing any of that. So I'm still drinking from the fire hose, just understanding banking. And then I had to take another step on just learning the compliance and what a BSA agent and stuff has in there. But acquiring the talent in order for this company to be successful is crucial. I get to sit here in front of you all, and again, I'm blessed and humbled to be here, but I don't sit here without my team. And my team every day is the one that propels it, taking my strengths and understanding my weaknesses and my gaps, and building my team around filling those gaps within the company. Because as an angel investor or as a VC, a more sophisticated investor at certain times, they're going to look at your team. Do you have the makeup to complete this? It's not just about the idea. We all have ideas. Ideas are a dime a dozen. It's the plan, it's the execution, and do you have the people or the resources around you to then execute? And as an entrepreneur, as a Black entrepreneur, it's hard to find talent. We're in California, right? It's expensive. People are not working for free. Developers don't work for stock anymore, right? They have these great jobs at Google and LinkedIn and everywhere else where they're getting their $150,000, $200,000. How do you grab them? And one of the things I've learned throughout my kind of entrepreneurial career is aligning and being a CEO that's more of a servant. Like, my company is NatureTrak, and I have to be a servant to the stakeholders who have invested in this. I have a fiduciary duty in order for NatureTrak to succeed. So I have to align that mission. But my team are also individuals. If I don't understand their goals, or if I don't understand where they're trying to take their career path, then how can I get them behind NatureTrak? So one of the things I always do with all my employees is, what's your goal? Where do you want to go in your career? Do you want to be that VP at Google? Do you want to get a developer job at Twitter? Startups is a place for all of us to get that jumpstart. It's not just jumpstart NatureTrak and win. And what when I tell my team in this opportunity is like, yeah, I may not be able to pay you that $150,000, but maybe I could pay you 80. Maybe I could pay you even 60 and I'll give you a lot of stock options. But what you're going to be able to do here is learn how your position fits into the entire ecosystem of a company. So that when you move on to that next level, that next job that you're at, you can speak to your position and how that relates to the business goals or the vision of the actual company. And if you succeed at that job and you own what you're doing in NatureTrak, NatureTrak by itself will succeed there. So my job as CEO is really, working with my team to reach their goals, and then the goals of NatureTrak will be there. And I found when I've been able to do that, I've been able to attract top talent that stays. I mean, I have a team that's been with me from the beginning, where we've missed paychecks, we've had to skip, we've doubled up here, but they all believed in the vision, not only of NatureTrak, but they see the benefit of where they're going in their careers and how they've grown being a part of this startup.
I love that. I appreciate the servant leadership and that component. That's something that I definitely look at as a core philosophy of my own leadership style. And so one of the things, I love that you said is using startups as a jumpstart for your experience, and obviously selfishly working at a university, would love for more students to plug into the startup space and have that experience. But I couldn't agree more that you got, one is the experience of learning how to navigate an ecosystem and, how you can create value in different places. And I'm wondering, where are you currently getting your talent and the team that you're building? Is that from the Sacramento region, or are you, now that we're in a remote kind of world, where is your team located?
Yeah, my team is Sacramento. The majority of us is Sacramento. The other part is the Bay. We have a couple sprinkles out in LA, and then we even have somebody in Colorado right now. I always looked at it from, again, prior experiences. Obviously, we can outsource. Obviously, that's more cost effective. But depending on what the core business is of your business, I think, we're dealing with some really complex stuff. The security is really, top priority for us. And being, at least together in theory, where we're an hour or two drive or an hour flight, where we can all get together, get on the whiteboard and really work this out is important. As we've obviously used outsourced resources, we've did it on more of a project base, but the whole core team is here. And what I found in Sacramento, there's just so much value of talent on this side. Again, some of these articles have been, so slowly circulating out, and just, more and more developers have been knocking on my door and connecting with me on LinkedIn. We've been looking for a data scientist for so long, and then I just got 3 that came, this week with StartupSac, and then even with the Biz Journals article. So I mean, there's tons of talent here, and I think, in my migration from the Bay to Sacramento, I think we're seeing that a lot. There's a lot of opportunities out here in Sacramento. I'm calling it Silicon Valley East right now. And there's definitely, tech talent. When we were in the Urban Hive, we worked with many of the people there, on a contract basis, because there's talent there. I think, Sac State and UC Davis has done a tremendous job of having that talent here, and also having, creating a community aspect, but also providing resources to entrepreneurs like myself, so that people that are in the Bay Area will migrate out here.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Jontae. So jumping in, I wanted to look at some of your recent success back in December, where you made an acquisition, or it could have been a merger as well. I think it was an acquisition of, I'm going to probably butcher the name, but Co-Pacific Strategies. I definitely butchered that, but it's a cannabis consulting company. But just curious of what was that actual acquisition like, and how did you set yourself up for that success?
Yeah, again, we're talking about the team and filling gaps. And so where we were light on was, financial service experience. Yes, we have the enterprise software, we have the technology background, we have the cannabis background, but we're in banking now, we're in fintech. And so we had to fill those gaps. And Copaesthetic was a consulting company, comprised of BSA AML agents that had that compliance background, that could sit with us in these decisions with the financial institution. And learning the sales cycle of selling to a bank, it starts at the board. And so there has to be a board decision to come into cannabis. It's not like other industries that I've seen that, hey, we're just going to take the latest, greatest software out there. There's a huge process. The sales cycle is long. It could be, as short as 3 months, as long as 2 years in some cases, depending on where they're comfortable. And so we needed to be able to sit with these stakeholders in this buying process throughout the life cycle, being able to start at the beginning. How do we get further upstream and not be at the downstream position when they're making, the decision to get into cannabis banking? Because you have to build out the compliance framework. You have to tie into existing controls. We have to mitigate the certain risks. There's certain percentages within the bank that they're able to adhere to. So there's a lot more than saying, oh, we're in cannabis, now I need a platform. And so Copaesthetic fills all those gaps for us, being able to provide the documentation that needs. We actually just went through a federal audit and we had an amazing outcome come out of that. So now, we're federally and state audited tested, right? So we've come out, bulletproof on that side. And Copaesthetic, now, NatureTrak played a huge role in that. So, it was an acquisition. You don't typically hear about acquisitions for, early stage startups like NatureTrak, but I mean, it was almost like we just plugged their team in and it rounded us out. So it was really great for us. It set us on this trajectory that we're on today. And, there's some other targets out there. So maybe you'll see some more coming soon.
Nice. Well, we look forward to seeing some of that news here soon. And Copaesthetic. So there we go. Thank you for helping me with that one. And so I'm looking at, we were just talking about team and how valuable that is to you. And I'm curious of bringing in, a whole new set of team that you maybe didn't necessarily build from the get-go. I'm curious of kind of how you're approaching that from one, being in a different place. I sounded like the team was based in Denver. And so kind of how are you maintaining that culture that you've built from the get-go of founding NatureTrak?
Yeah, well, I come from a sports background. And so and I had early conversations, I'm like, hey, when I come in and when you enter to the team, you become family. And so it's my job to make sure you succeed. And this is not without challenges because we are dealing with different cultures. But the one thing I've learned from sports, especially basketball, for instance, is that you need different people to fit different roles. And you can't just have one personality. There's some people that are going to be a little bit more rigid. There's other people that are more carefree and friendly, but they all serve a purpose. And if you can wrap that around, I like the different personalities because it's iron sharpening iron. I want everybody to be on top of their game so that when we're in a meeting, I want everybody to bring their best ideas. Let's talk it through. Let's come to agreements and let's move. I don't want too many like-minded individuals per se. So that way we're getting the best out of each other. And trying to wrap that around in a culture, we haven't really framed it anywhere just yet, but that's where I kind of keep it from. I always look at that sports side is like, if you're here and you got a job, well, we're going to make sure you do that job. And then how do we make the team better? How do I now support my CTO with now the chief compliance officer is here and vice versa to bring the best out of them?
I love it. The iron sharpening iron is such a great visual for teams. And I'm, partly thinking of one of the unique things that I feel like you've been able to do is put people in places of their excellence, right? So being able to come in from the finance side and just dial that in, you feel like you're having that success and that continues on and that success breeds further success. So I love that. I'm gonna say I have two more of my questions left. So it looks like there's some of the chat going on. So I think there's some questions there, but wanted to just set the audience so they know their time for Q&A will be coming here pretty soon. So my second to last question is, you shared with me you're on the fundraising trail. Would love to hear how that's going, and are you making inroads in your fundraising push, and what are some of your strategies for going and doing that? I did see you went and attended this Money 2020, which I hadn't really learned about. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about what that is and how fundraising is going for you.
No, yes, absolutely. I'll talk about Money 2020 first, and then I'll roll into the fundraising. Money 2020 was when we made that pivot. We entered the Startup Academy in 2019. We were picked as one of the top 10 fintech startups to watch. I was actually able to pitch in Vegas, the last conference before, we've all gone to virtual conferences. And that was huge. My pitch coach at the time was Citibank Ventures. So I got to learn it from that bank side, and the whole experience of having a pitch coach and a speech coach and a venture coach on that side was really great. And that really put us on the trajectory that we're now, because we were the new kids in fintech, especially on cannabis, right? We were the new kids on the block, and then out of nowhere, here came NatureTrak, and we got on people's radar. So that really set the stage for that side, and it really propelled some of the fundraising. So I mean, we've been raising since 2016. Up until this point, we've raised almost $2.5 million. We're actually kicking off around our Series C2 right now for another $2.5 million on a 13 pre. A lot of it's been really friends and family. We had our friends and family round where we had anywhere from about 4 to 500,000 that we had. We were also talking to other individuals who wanted to start cannabis companies. So I would meet people and they're like, oh, I'm going to start a cultivation. I'm like, well, that's going to cost you about 250 grand. How about you give me 25 grand and then I'll 10x your 250 grand if you come in here with me. So getting creative on that side, and like, yeah, you don't want to be a grower, come on the tech side and come to the picks and shovels. And so my stakeholders and my early investors, I mean, they've been tremendous. And what I would tell about entrepreneurs is, obviously we need money and we got to pay salaries and we got to keep the wheels burning, but you got to pick strategic money. You got to pick smart money. Not all money is good money. And unfortunately, sometimes you're in a position you have to take money, and I completely understand that. But when you can find somebody that also has a network, that also has influence, that helps it out greatly, because through these 3 years, if it wasn't for my early stakeholders, they continued to bring people in when we needed resources, as we continue to hit milestones, and working closely, staying on the phones, having weekly meetings, making sure that they're involved in every single piece of the process, so that when they're out there, advocating for your company to bring in money, you have champions that can sit there and really stand up and talk about the NatureTrak story. And so we're kind of transitioning now to more of a sophisticated investor, as we would say. So we're looking at some of the smaller VCs, but we know we're still kind of in that in-between stage. Like we're now generating revenue. We had our POC. We started with that business partner, built out the platform. We have traction. We have that $1.2 billion moving through our system. So we're kind of building this behemoth now, and the story behind NatureTrak is, okay, who wants to sit on the next winner, and will NatureTrak be the compliance company moving forward? And so we have a lead investor right now for our Series C2. He was one of our early investors, so we have those terms coming out. We actually are going to be doing some crowdfunding with Republic. And on the Republic side, they'll be kicking off the campaign here probably end of March, where we'll open it up to all sorts of investors from there. And then we're still looking to round out kind of that last $500,000, $1 million with some other VCs that we've been talking to in the cannabis space that have expressed extreme interest. We're in due diligence with a lot of them right now. And so we think within this next quarter, probably mid second quarter, we should be closing that up.
Great story on the bringing people on from the picks and shovels. I was like picks and shovels of the green rush instead of the gold rush here. But I love that bringing on those partners. And so I did have one follow up, just as I think you pointed out something that is valuable for entrepreneurs that are fundraising. Is you talked a lot about strategic value add that some of these investors played. I'm curious of kind of how you identified those strategic partners or investors, and what your kind of process for going that and building that filter from your own fundraising lens.
Yeah, it was no expertise of mine, right? I've heard it being in that space, but you truly don't understand until it's, oh, my bank account's short. Where do I get the next, set of tranche of funds? And it was in that process of taking money, money's gone. Taking money, money's gone. It's like, okay, this is not going to work, because if I always have to find another one-off person, we're going to run out of gas before we even get started. And so, and then I wouldn't say necessarily interviewing, the potential investors, the question comes up is, who else do you think would be interested in NatureTrak? Do you have anybody else within your network that you can share our story, that you can connect the conversation to? And it was just, by that process, started to open up to be like, well, if they don't really have anybody else to reach out to, I'm going to be right back here in the next 3 months. And I think I can speak for all entrepreneurs, the ones who've obviously hit it out the park in the unicorns and stuff of the world. Fundraising is by far the worst thing to do, because it's something you got to do all the time. And you got to keep those relationships in. You got to understand what people are looking for. And by the time you make it, then everybody wants to give you the money. So, but it is really just asking those questions and just is figuring out from there. I mean, there was no real science to it for me. But then as these people come into place, I had those mentors were like, hey, Jontae, like, this money's good, but we need to look over here. Who else are they connected to? Are they potentially another investor, right? Are they going to come in another round if you hit certain milestones? So just really having those conversations, as much as you're searching for funds and trying to, fund the company, you have to interview them as much as they're interviewing you, because the better that relationship, the further you're going to go.
It's great insight. So the last question I have before we open it up to the audience is, one, do you have any final thoughts or kind of last words? And then also, what can we as a community do to support you in NatureTrak?
Great question. I mean, my last, kind of words to the entrepreneurs out there is that, being an entrepreneur is like trying to become a pro in basketball, football, baseball. Like, there's 1%ers in this. You're not just going to be able to have an idea and then think you're going to be the next Elon Musk. Like, you got to put all your time, heart, and soul into everything that you're doing. And sometimes it is a lonely road, but the path that you're on, the success lies in the struggle. There were so many times in other ventures that I had, and I don't mind sharing the story, where, I thought I was going bankrupt, where, ideas were just not making it. And I was taking every single penny I had to make this work. And, I was doing the process wrong. I wasn't planning and executing. I was grabbing at every single thing out there. Like, be laser focused on what you're trying to do and what the goal is, and then be that true professional. Like, you gotta become Steph Curry. There's few LeBron Jameses out there, but you can perfect your skills and your talents in order to get you there. And it's really an education through that. And for me, having that sports background, when I approached it like that, then getting up in the morning wasn't hard. Having the failure and the stumble blocks, that didn't stop me from coming, because I knew when I used to run sprints or I lifted weights or I was shooting those jump shots. Yeah, I didn't make 10 in a row this time, but as I continue to practice, as I continue to sharpen my skills, then I could make that 8 in a row, 9 in a row, 10 in a row. And that's what you're doing here as an entrepreneur. Your pitching skills will get better. Your decks become more precise to the information that you're looking for. You're polished in your presentation. All these things are important in order to get to that next level.
Thank you for those last words. Is there anything we can, as a community, do to support you and NatureTrak?
Yeah, I mean, I think just having these events going, I think these are great. I mean, I attended your guys' events in the past. I think you guys may have had one at Urban Hive at one point in time, and I was in that crowd, you know, hearing the stories. I think it's always tough. You know, you have friends and families and other people that, you know, may have stable jobs and they don't understand, you know, the plight of the entrepreneur. When you have the skill set where you can easily make 100, 150 grand a year and be happy, but that's not what makes you content. You want to solve problems. You want to leave a lasting impact. So I think if you know, continue having events like this, personally for NatureTrak, we're always looking for talent, you know, internships and stuff. I mean, I've gone all the way down to Sac High, where we started them out early with social media, reaching back into the community, you know, helping people from diverse backgrounds get introduced to tech at an early age and the mechanics at it, and then kind of bringing them through. So continue, you know, to supply the resources and cultivating, you know, to use a cannabis term, cultivating that new talent that, you know, tech companies like NatureTrak will need.
I love it. Well, I love the hunger that you show, and I can definitely commit to continuing these conversations. So I know Jeff and Laura could do so as well. So there seems to be a lot going on in the chat. So I am going to help have Jeff help me real quick to see who maybe had the first question, since there was a good amount.
I think Laura's also good at monitoring that question or the hands. And we like to ask people to raise their Zoom hands, their digital hands, to ask a question. I know there's been a lot of questions in the chat, and I know there was one way back from Brian Hoblet about navigating the federal banking issues. Laura, do you have a lineup lined up as far as who wants to go first? Who should go first?
Well, mostly what I saw in the chat was a discussion amongst our participants, some who are very familiar with those rules and some who are not. So I'm thinking maybe we do sort of a question on that, and then Alicia, who raised her hand first, would be next. But Jontae, there was a general question about how has banking changed as related to cannabis over, say, the last 3 or 4 years. Some of our participants were under the understanding that banks couldn't touch money from cannabis business, and I think that has changed. So do you have an answer for that?
No, yeah, yes, I do. So, so a few things. So technically, yes, it's federally illegal, but if your state has, you know, legalized it or has a medical program, there is statutes in order for institutions to then bank cannabis. One of the biggest challenges for the banks is more the regulatory compliance. So the Safe Banking Act has, you know, kind of gone through its stages, and hopefully it looks like it's picking up steam here, that it could potentially, you know, pass in the next couple of years. Some people are bullish that there may be some language on it on this year, but the initial part of the Safe Banking Act basically states that if a financial institution is banking cannabis, that their insurance, their FDIC insurance, will not be ripped away from them. So that was one huge hurdle to have that FDIC insured bank to be behind it. The second part is really the charter of the bank. Because cannabis is just now legal, many of the institutions, banks or credit unions, and there's definitely a distinction, their charters didn't include banking cannabis. And so when we spoke about acquiring Copacetic and being able to sit at the board and have those conversations, the bank then has to make a board level decision to enter into cannabis. And they have to kind of submit their compliance framework or re-cure their charter in order to say, hey, we are now going to be a cannabis bank. And so that's letting the Fed and the OCC know that they're entering into cannabis banking, and then they'll have audits that will now test that program coming out. And so in the audit, it's all about anti-money laundering. Do you have the proof behind the deposits that are coming in? So from one point, there's the EDD and KYC. EDD stands for enhanced due diligence. And so the example that I use is when we open up our own personal bank account, or let's say open a business bank account, you're going to come in, they're going to ask you for your EIN, they're going to ask you who owns, more than 25% of your business, what type of business it is. You're pretty much done after that, right? When on the cannabis side, there's so much enhanced due diligence they must do. They're running OFAC checks on all the principal owners. Sometimes they do the beneficial ownership of the company all the way down to 1%, because there's a lot of complicated organizational structures in some of these cannabis companies on how they were kind of, I wouldn't, not necessarily hiding, but trying to get financial services through management companies and stuff. So they have to uncover everybody in the business who stands to benefit from that. And then the next part of that equation is the know your customer, understanding who they're doing business with in the supply chain, what's their license type, etc. And so what NatureTrak is doing, we gather all that information. And up into our platform and even our competition is doing this all manually, which is why we've been able to bring so many transactions through the bank. We've automated all the process through technology. And so it's just that process of, again, having some guidance from FinCEN, the Safe Banking Act being appointed, the state actually having a medical or adult use, and then the bank making the decision to come into cannabis banking and putting the proper controls and tools within their compliance department in order to stand a federal audit or use a system like NatureTrak.
Okay, so our next question is from Alicia. So Alicia, you could go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Are you there, Alicia? Okay, let's go ahead and move to Justin.
Great presentation, Jontae. Really appreciated it. Curious about cryptocurrency, and when I first kind of found out what was going on in California with cannabis, it seemed like that was a natural way for these companies to avoid some of the regulatory issues. But I don't know if it's the instability. I'm curious why it hasn't been a bigger part of the business, and will it be in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're dealing with the compliance issue, right? There's crypto and the blockchain is obviously, exploding in other arenas. And it's the complexity of banks not understanding crypto completely, and then now adding another monster of the cannabis industry on top of that. And so there's definitely solutions that people are using crypto in order to utilize transactions within the cannabis industry, but it just hasn't caught fire. We were actually talking to a financial institution today that is in crypto and is in cannabis. And so that's a rare unicorn within itself. But we definitely see where our platform and our compliance will go in the future. Crypto is the future, right? If you see anything that happened with Mark Andreessen and their firm divesting a lot of stuff and getting into these cryptocurrencies and stuff out there, it's going to push towards that. And so we want to make our compliance so complex that we then become the foremost authority once we go to the cryptocurrency on the cannabis side. But again, to sum that all up, there's definitely huge synergy between crypto and cannabis. It's just that we're still such a novice or immature environment that the two of them just make it too complex from a compliance standpoint that some people just put their hands up.
That makes sense. Awesome.
No, thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and have Alicia ask her question.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks for having me and allowing me to ask the question. Thank you to Jontae. So in 2016, I introduced a digital online platform for broadcasting, programming, news, information, current events for the Bay Area. And I was noticed by Adobe. And Adobe offered to sponsor my platform. I got super excited because I just happened to, just launch on YouTube and got this major sponsorship. From there, I have worked to really perfect my platform. And now my platform's getting a lot of looks from different radio stations who are looking to try and find advertisers on a smaller scale because the major advertisers can't really afford television and radio anymore. They're looking to smaller platforms, social media like mine that look like mine because I'm from the broadcast world. I launched the 24-hour news, digital news for Cron 4 television. I launched the 511 travelers information system in the transportation department. I'm a pioneer in digital broadcasting. And I want to work for myself. I don't want to go and work for Essence Magazine and launch their digital. I don't want to work for Yahoo for their digital platform or Google News. I want to work for myself. I want to like Roku and Hulu and all that, but I just don't know where to go from here. I have the prototype. I'm the technical director. I'm the producer. I'm the creator. I'm the executive producer. I'm getting money and support from friends and small chambers, business chambers to keep my business afloat, but I just don't know where to go from here with my broadcast solutions platform that I think will sustain itself through advertising dollars. Just some advice, please. Thank you.
No, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, content is king right now with everything that's going on in that digital space. I mean, the one thing that I didn't hear in that and where I would kind of offer some advice is where to set the milestones and the traction of your platform and how that will relate to the investment dollars that are coming in. If you're searching for the investors and you're trying to get that traction, obviously you had a great case study with Adobe, taking that case study and then creating a plan of how your investment will then propel your company through these milestones. I think if you kind of have that story when you've already had some great success, it seems like there just needs to be a little bit more stickiness in there and in preparing that message. So not being in the digital content space, the one thing again that I'm hearing is, try to set those milestones of, whether it's viewership, clicks, etc. What are those milestones and how they track and how that would relate to the investment that you have coming in. And I think that would be the power for you to get to that next stage. After that point, it seems like there's definitely opportunities. Sometimes it's what's the low hanging fruit? Which ones can you attach yourself to create that revenue base and that stickiness within your platform as you continue to build it out. With our partners or one of our banking partners, we offered them, pretty much the platform for free just to learn the ins and outs of banking because we had the cannabis compliance, but then we needed to figure out what was going on in the banking world. How did they work on an everyday basis? I never worked in a bank. And so they wanted our platform. So we basically gave it to them for peanuts and they became our design partner and pretty much helped us build the rest of the platform out. So now that we have a use case and not only just a proof of concept, we have a product market fit of our product that this is what a bank needs in order to bank cannabis. and reading those next spots. So, you know, if you have the Adobes or, you know, I think you said Cron 4 or something, you know, use them to, you know, what else can you add to your platform that really helps in that trajectory, and create it from there. I hope that helps.
Thank you. It does. It does.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Alicia, I post in the chat, there's a platform called Mentor Sacramento that you might want to check out, where you can sign up as an entrepreneur. It's free, and there are volunteer mentors who can help you on different aspects of your business. And I'm also going to post a link here soon also for Capital Region SBDC and the California Capital Women's Business Center, which can all provide you with one-on-one consulting on those things.
Thank
So
you.
I don't see a hand raised at the moment, but I have a question for you, Jontae. A lot of times we meet people who have a startup idea, and they want to work on that startup, but they believe that they can get funded before they've actually built anything. And my experience is that that's near on impossible. So I'm curious how you bootstrapped prior to investment. What did you have built prior to getting outside investment? If you could share some of that timeline with us.
No, yeah. Well, the first thing, you know, to answer that, any entrepreneur here, if you have an idea and your idea is to get funded, throw your idea away. Now, you can't build something expecting funding. Once you get into these angels and these VCs, the questions and the scrutiny that they're going to have is not, oh, I just have a great idea, I want to get funded. If the perfect scenario, if I can go back to 2016 and start all over, it would be, how do I create revenue and show that people are willing to pay for my product right at the beginning? That doesn't mean a freemium model or a usage model doesn't work, but if you need to start from day one, understanding how you're going to monetize this, because it's not if somebody pays you $1 or if they paid you $1 million for the product. It's the fact that somebody paid you, and is that repeatable? So if you come in looking for funding, you know, you're going to have this great idea. You're going to be like, oh, my platform is worth $10 million. And if anybody's watched Shark Tank, that's, you know, airs all the time, the first thing they're going to do is, well, why is your company worth $10 million? Well, if you have no traction, no customers, where is that at? And so they already start, you know, hammering down your valuation, or eventually, if you do make a deal, you give away your company. And so I would just say that first. So like, if you're gonna start a company, you really gotta position yourself to kind of bootstrap to get to where you're going. I was working multiple jobs. I took loans out. I was lucky enough to have a support base within my family that helped me at times. But you know, I was using all my free time going to internships, or you know, going to schools to find interns to help get stuff going. Every little thing I could do. I actually had a friend that we kind of started at the same time, and he started driving Lyft and Uber to help, you know, bootstrap to where to get his company off the ground. There's a reason why they say 98% of startups fail due to money, and so you really gotta come from that aspect. It's not that, hey, if you don't have money, you can't start a company. But again, what I'm saying is have that plan for monetization and that proof point that people are willing to pay for this. That's what you need to be able to stand on in order to get funding. And then there's many different metrics that prove traction. It could be usership, you know, how many accounts that you're getting on, you know, the press that you're seeing, the usage, how long people are on your platform. You really got to build stuff. There was one other tool we did in the POC phase. We're using Figma now, but we used to use Envision a lot. And so when I was, before I started Bluntly, or before we even really got to that point, I got with a designer, and we designed wireframes and we put it on Envision and we made it clickable. So when I went out to people to prove that, hey, look at the transparency we could show, I was literally just showing them screens, but to everybody else, it looked like I had a working app. And so there's other things you can do to show that proof point on that side and get that feedback. And then I was then able to turn around and then provide people for, hey, I need funding to keep this going. Well, look, I had this concept, people love this, and they're waiting for me to actually build the full project. So, I mean, bootstrapping is tough. I mean, we all have different backgrounds, different financial situations, but you got to dig in. Again, using the professional athlete side. I mean, we were kids, and our dream is to be that NBA, NFL, that MLB player. You know, we didn't have funds there, but you were going to practice, you were running, you were working out, you were doing everything you had to do, knowing that that payday will be there at that time. It's the same thing on the bootstrapping side. You're going to have to, you know, dial back eating out at restaurants. Maybe, you know, that bottle of wine that you enjoy, it's once a week or once a month. You know, maybe that membership at the gym now is you're running around the block. Like, you have to make those sacrifices. If you make those sacrifices, the VCs and angels, they will see that, and then they'll know that you're a good steward of your money. You have that fiduciary duty that, you know, you're going to squeeze, you know, $10 out of this nickel, right? You're going to get everything you can out of it, and people feel more comfortable providing resources to you.
Great answer. Great advice, Jontae. So on to Joe has a question for you. So go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Jontae, great presentation. I think we have some similar friends in the world of AML and compliance. So awesome job. Just want to ask regarding your software, I think it presupposes that the bank clients you work with are already knowingly banking cannabis or are at least interested in doing that. Have you thought about the opposite of that by going to banks and seeing if you can work with banks that want to understand their exposure? In other words, how many customers do they not know that are involved in Canna? So recently, just some background, so I'm in the crypto space. So recently, CipherTrace, which does blockchain forensics and analytics, put out a study and said that banks are underestimating their exposure to crypto by a factor of 10x. And then they looked at it, and basically the banks are like, oh yeah, we have a policy that says we don't bank crypto. Like, that's going to stop anyone. And then they looked for some keywords, and it was just all these normal everyday systems that they were relying on were completely ineffective. So I'm wondering if the same could be true for your world in cannabis, where you could come into a bank and say, look, you have all this exposure you don't know about. You need to quantify and tabulate that risk. Is that something that you guys do offer or would consider offering?
We definitely don't offer that now, but we have kicked that around, right? There's
Cool.
Still a small portion of banks, right? Our numbers that we know without a shadow of a doubt, there's 129 institutions that are banking cannabis. Well, there's over 5,000 banks across the year, but then there's another almost 500 to 600 that have filed a SAR, right, on the compliance side, that they may or may not be banking cannabis, right? But we know that there's these people are getting bank accounts, but they're just hidden in these complicated structures. So it is definitely something that we're considering to, you know, to go to the B of A's of the world or the Chase and be like, hey, your policy is that you don't bank cannabis, but we can show you that there are cannabis people within your side. But one portion why we haven't gone that direction is that we still want to take the stance from a company standpoint that we're here for the operators, we're here for the cannabis industry, right? And so while our client may be the bank, we want to be able to service the operators. So, you know, we're not going to be dry snitching on on the cannabis companies that may be running around out there with, you know, that have an account at B of A and stuff. I mean, I personally had my Chase account frozen and then closed twice. And, you know, we don't touch anything in cannabis. So they're definitely watching stuff on there, and I think it would definitely be a tool that we're utilizing. But we've had the conversations, haven't really got to that point, but it's a great thing and very astute, especially you being in the space, that that would be something of need.
Yeah, no, thanks for your response. I appreciate it.
Yep, no problem.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised, but I know you guys have more questions. While you think about those questions, I'll ask one. With all these startups, Jontae, that you've been involved in, is there sort of a number one lesson that you want to share, or something? Like sometimes we ask this question, like, and people say, oh, I wish I'd hired a lawyer sooner, or I wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd done that. So do you have anything to share in that area? And then Anatoly has the next question after that.
Yeah, you just brought something to my memory, is that I love lawyers now. I was never a fan of lawyers, but you understand how you start your company at the beginning and how you create that structure and how you can separate from said partners that plays a huge role in how attractive your company is. You can make one small error in something that, me not being a lawyer or being a new to the entrepreneurial side or starting up a company, have no idea in a contract. And that could be the reason why somebody doesn't invest in you. And so I'm all about lawyers now. So if you're starting out at the beginning, it's really get that advice on how to set your structure up and what is attractive and what's the norm, not, oh, let me protect my company so it's all me and nobody can ever get me out. It's not from that standpoint. It's like, you want this to be attractive, not only from your product, but from the infrastructure of your company. So they're going to look at you from the product. This is great. Oh, you have this amazing things going on. Then when that due diligence happens, they're going to get into the infrastructure and the framework of your company. And it comes down to, whether you're an LLC or S Corp or C Corp, have you been keeping minutes of your board? There's certain things like that is a non-starter for some VCs because the liability that's out there. The other part I would say is from the HR side. Man, we're in California and HR laws do not play. So it's definitely, have some lawyer on your side and make sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's from that HR perspective, because, that can derail everything. You can have the greatest, widget in the world, and then it's taken down from an HR issue that, you had no idea was, something to be concerned about. So, I mean, that would be the two things I would talk to.
Anatoly, yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Hey, fantastic presentation. Thank you. It was really, really refreshing to hear, your position on, helping the cannabis industry out and, being on the right side of the world. I have a question. So you have fantastic technology. It's really exciting. We have some projects in the hemp space where, we could really benefit from technology like that. And I was curious if you guys are looking at the hemp space. And obviously, in that case, we're not really talking about compliance, banking compliance per se, but, what we're looking at is the risk on transactions and financial transactions. So we actually, want to be the institution looking at the transaction, guaranteeing the transaction. So we are sort of like an insurance company, in the hemp industry. And we need to understand who the players are and how they work and, who they are behind the veneer of their appearance, right? So are you guys looking at in the hemp market at all?
Yeah, there's banks that we're talking to that you're more friendly to hemp than cannabis. Like you said, hemp is not regulated like it is cannabis. I mean, you have everything kind of already laid out. Essentially, it's the same plant, right? So our plant, our platform can transfer over to the hemp space. Our track and trace can be used for that side, and we're very much looking at how we provide that compliance tool. So like when you're talking about verifying some of the players, we use track and trace to verify the inventory, right? It's about how much they can produce, not the dollar amount. right?
Right.
So being able to verify their inventory can now provide, even, greater, I guess, authentication or authority for your platform to say, yes, we know this is real on that side.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk after because this is what we're looking at right now. So
No, yeah, happy. I mean,
Yeah.
sounds like you're doing something super interesting in there, maybe some synergy. So love to learn more.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so got a question from Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
I wanted to know how the fact that cannabis is growing up on kind of a state-by-state basis instead of one federal system has drawbacks and benefits for your business as you move into the space.
Yeah, so it's actually a huge benefit for us right now that the Fed's not kind of, taking it over per se, because we get to kind of set the gold standard of what compliance is on cannabis. There's obviously some guidance, but the states are taking it on from an individual basis. And so from a strategic standpoint and tactfully with us, we're following the states that are going to adult use, right? Because they're turning from medical to that adult use or that full-on legalization. And that makes it more attractive to the financial institutions because it's a larger piece of the pie, right? That they can be depositing. So it helps us on that side where we can be early, really set the stage on what compliance can be. We're actually, partnering and going to be deploying our system in the U.S. Virgin Islands. They're just now launching their medical program. And so we're bringing all our knowledge from California to build their track and trace system and kind of set the standards from there. But one of the drawbacks of, the federal government not being in there is that there's no guidance. So there's still that gray area of the language of what's acceptable and what's not. And so we're working with lobbyists, we have consultants, I'm on the board of this emerging markets coalition where we're going to the Capitol, and it's really now trying to, put the influence of what is standard. We are the cannabis experts as it relates to banking. And this is how you mitigate risk. And here's the steps that you do it. And you need a technology to do that. This is not something manual you can do to scale your program. And so that's kind of like the pluses and minuses. But for as long as the Fed's not out of it, we're loving the opportunity to become that gold standard, because when federal legalization comes in, it's just going to make compliance more complex. Like they're going to put more rules and more regulation, which where NatureTrak will be, we will already have, that 60, 75% of all that regulation built in. And now we have the technology chops to build out the rest, where our competition will be pretty much starting from ground zero. So that's kind of the trajectory we're on now. Hope that answers your question.
Okay, can you guys hear me? I've been in too many Zoom meetings and my earpods just died. Alicia has the next question.
Okay, hello again, Jontae. Just a quick, I think this is, pitching 101. Like, what's involved in a pitch? I was invited to a pitch event, and I don't know if I was invited because they want me to pitch or if they want me to observe. I mean, what happens when people are pitching their ideas, and what are some of the things I need to think about if I'm going to ever try and pitch?
Yeah, well, typically for pitch events, they have a set group that are already queued up that are going to be pitching there. Typically at pitch events, there's angels or VCs in there. So they already kind of have like their crop of say 5 or 10 companies. So it sounds like that could be possibly an observation. But if you're going into a pitch event, it's really, who's your company, what's the problem, your solution, your value prop, and how you stand to get there. I can share with you some materials after this. We kind of follow Guy Kawakowski's principles on, the perfect pitch deck. You can actually Google it. It's how you get your tell your company story basically in 10 slides. We also look at the Sequoia group. They've also put out some language on, the 14 things VC people are going to ask you. And so I would start with those as the baseline and the foundation to build out your pitch deck. And then continue to refine it over time. I think if I go back into my actual, Dropbox or my hard drive file, I probably have at least 100 pitch decks from 2016 to now. So it's always a living, breathing thing. Each time getting better, more concise. But I think start there with the basis, and then it's just telling your story. Start where, how you got to the point where you are, the problem you're solving, and the solution. And what makes you unique to the competition, and how big the opportunity is. And those are kind of, what they're looking for.
Yeah, and Alicia, if you stay on through the end, we're going to talk about a couple other resources in the Sacramento region that will help you answer those questions. So let's go to Mikul.
Hi, Jontae. Great session. My question is, what advice would you give to a college student who's about to enter in the real world? Like, what kind of advice would you give?
Well, jump into the pool. The water's fine. No, as if I look back in college, into where I am now, obviously hindsight's always 2020. There's tons of things that I would do differently. But I think the one thing I could say is just keep an open mind of where you're trying to go. You have a specific skill set that you're coming out of college and your degree, and that has value in different arenas that you may not know, right? And being agile enough and flexible enough to kind of take the opportunities that are in front of you and learn and use those as the foundation of where you're trying to take your career. Definitely, I've changed so many times. Pivot is a nasty word in the entrepreneurial sense, but coming out of college, there's just so much that you can do. And if you're already on this call, it sounds like you're already headed in this entrepreneurial spirit and getting out there and looking to make an impact. So now's the time to do it. There's no better time than now. And you learn as you go. There's nothing better than learning on the job. And you're gonna have some skinned elbows and knees and some bruises from there, but you'll come out it better on the other side.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Great advice. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Jontae. Jeff, I think you're up now. I think we run out of time for Q&A, and Jeff's going to bring it home with some valuable information.
I'm adding cleanup, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank Jontae again for the great story and the great question or answers to the questions from the audience. Thank you again for coming out and really giving back to the entrepreneurship community. We really find that really valuable. So thank you again. I'm sure everybody echoes that from what I've seen in the chat. So thanks again, and thank you all for coming.